Hey guys, thanks for tuning in again. We are coming to the end of our look at the book of Daniel, specifically the prophecies of Daniel. We're looking at Daniel 11 at this point. This one might be split into a couple different segments. Daniel 11 and 12 might be 3 parts instead of just 1 part per chapter. So we looked at our timeline here. And this kind of gives us the last 7 years, known as the Tribulation, that there's going to be peace and safety for the first 3.5 years. And then in the middle of the week, suddenly peace and safety turns to calamity and terror. And Jeremiah even saw this. I mentioned in Daniel 9, Daniel's praying because he's reading Jeremiah 29. At least this is what's suspected, that there's going to be 70 years, and then Daniel will come back. Or the exiles will come back to Jerusalem. When you read Jeremiah 30, however, Jeremiah is seeing the return and he's rejoicing at it. But suddenly, around verse 5, Jeremiah's focus shifts and he's no longer rejoicing. Now he's saying, but what is this that I see? Why is it that every man is holding onto his stomach as if he's giving birth? Instead of seeing peace, I'm seeing terror. And this is where the phrase, the time of Jacob's trouble, comes in. It's Jeremiah 30, verse 7. So Jeremiah anticipates the return, but then suddenly there's something after the return that is taking place, that all that he had prophesied up to this point, he's saying, whatever it is that's taking place after the return, that is what I'm prophesying concerning. So here with the fulfillment, the last 7 years, we expect that to be after the return from the exile. And Jesus even talks about a future time of calamity. So we can't put Jeremiah and Daniel in the past. Jesus says they're future. Now, future compared to Jesus does not necessitate future to us. However, I think that there's good reason to believe it is future to us. Daniel 11, when you read Daniel 11, you quickly find a bunch of he and she and the king of the and his, etc. This language, it doesn't take long before you get lost. You forget which he's being referenced and she and which king is this exactly. And so for the sake of our study, I'm not going to sift through the details of who is being spoken of in this first 20 verses. There are online resources. You can just type into Google, Daniel 11, and it'll probably give you multiple various places where you can look, and they'll chart it all out for you. This verse refers to these people. I'm going to look at Daniel 11:21. This is where I break from the majority of scholarship. Now, just because it's majority of scholarship doesn't mean it's correct. And here's the reason. When you go to the end of the chapter, it seems incredibly obvious that the last 5 verses, if not the last 10 verses or so, are talking about the Antichrist figure of Revelation 13. If the very end is talking about the Antichrist, then you can trace the Hebrew antecedent. You trace, the noun, the subject, backward and backward and backward until you eventually come to verse 21, which is the beginning. This is where the dialogue opens. So from verse 21 onward, we're all talking about the exact same individual. Why people break it up and say this last 5 verses or the last 10 or so verses are speaking about the Antichrist, but not the first, this from verse 21, I'm not sure. I think it's just a lapse in understanding. I'm not sure exactly. So we're going to look at it here. I've made it so that the red here references the red here, and the purple references the purple, and this purple references this purple. So everything's kind of lined up for you here. It should be rather easy for us to see here. He will be succeeded by a contemptuous person who has not been given the honor of royalty. Well, you remember back in Daniel 8 that he comes to power, but not by his own power. Or in Daniel 2 even, I guess Daniel 2 doesn't talk about it. It talks about his destruction by not his own. Now, he will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure, Once again, we saw that in Daniel 8, when the people feel secure, when there's peace and people are declaring peace, peace. There is no peace. It's when they feel secure that he comes and he destroys many. Okay? And he will seize it through intrigue. Well, once again, back here in Daniel 8:23-25, we see that he's a master of intrigue. And with the arms of a flood, we saw that here in Daniel 9, that the end comes like a flood. After coming to an agreement with him, well, we saw that once again here in Daniel 9, the confirmation of a covenant. That's the beginning of the tribulation. You see how all these details are lining up. After coming to an agreement with him, he will act deceitfully. Here we see he causes deceit to prosper. And with only a few people, he will rise to power. Daniel 11, verses 24-28. I'm not going to put it all together because in this we see the details are pretty easy to kind of sift through. If you're following along, sorry. So we see this gives us details of a war that will help us identify who the Antichrist is. Now, he starts with a small following. Remember, he's a little horn, okay? He's a little horn. He starts with a small following. He spoils the richest provinces, but he distributes the riches. He doesn't keep them. His motive is something other than wealth. There's something other than riches and booty that creates him, or that causes him to distribute the wealth. It causes him to go to war. He's after something else entirely. He stirs up his power towards the king of the south, most likely Egypt. That is what is most likely. Remember the 4 kingdoms of Greece. And this man is called the king of the north, and he attacks the king of the south. Now the 2 kings strike a peace treaty, but they're deceptively desiring to attack one another again. So we can kind of see that all of these details are given, and we can actually, at that time, if we're able to recognize, okay, this guy's the king of the north, that guy's the king of the south, we're going to be able to prophesy there will come a time when the king of the north will invade the king of the south again. What you see here, it's not really peace, though they're declaring that they have come to peace. Now, the man, this king of the north, he returns, but his focus has shifted from the king of the south. Suddenly, it starts talking about there's hatred in his heart against the Holy Covenant. Now, notice this. The Holy Covenant does not necessarily mean the covenant of peace with Israel in Daniel 9:27. I think that this goes beyond just that covenant, and that there's a representation. It's a confirmation of the covenant, right? Maybe there's a covenant that's actually established, but maybe, this is all speculation, we don't know for sure, maybe there's a confirmation of the covenant that God has given them that land. Maybe that's the confirmation. Yeah, you're right. God has given you this, so therefore you can have it. So that's why I have this here. I want to give you a couple ideas to kind of run with. It might be that this hatred against the Holy Covenant isn't simply a hatred against the covenant of peace with Israel. Maybe there is none. Maybe there is. Maybe there isn't. It might, but I think what this is it's ultimately a hatred of the people, of God's people, of His land, which ultimately inevitably leads to a hatred of God. Okay? So, when we come to Daniel 9:29 and 30, this is just before we start discussing the destruction of Jerusalem and the establishment of the abomination of desolation. That will be in verse 31. So we read, at the appointed time, he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former. So once again, you can see, here's some prophetic material. You would be able to prophesy to people, this guy's going to attack the south. However, there's going to be ships that stop him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. Once again, Holy Covenant doesn't necessarily mean the confirmation of the covenant of Daniel 9:27. So shall he do, he shall even return, and have intelligence with those who forsake the holy covenant. Now, in the NIV, in Daniel 8:9-12, we read that it's because of rebellion that the sacrifice is taken away, and the host of the saints are given over to this little horn. It's because of rebellion. And even when you read 2 Thessalonians, when you get to I believe it's verse 4, you read the Greek. Look up the Greek. If you don't know Greek, just look it up and use a concordance. Use a lexicon. The Greek word suggests rebellion. Paul's looking for rebellion, and I think that the NIV is onto something here. Even when you look up the Hebrew, there's rebellion. It's not a great falling away. There's a rebellion that takes place. Here, when rebels have become completely wicked, we find that that's when there's something happening. So he has intelligence with those who forsake the Holy Covenant. There are people who are forsaking the Holy Covenant, and thus they are giving themselves over to this Antichrist figure. When you read like Zechariah 14, I can't seem to highlight this. I keep on moving it. When you read like Zechariah 14, it talks about, I believe it's 14:14 even, that even Judah fights against Israel, fights against Jerusalem in Armageddon, the last battle with the Antichrist. Even Judah is fighting alongside of the Antichrist. Why? Because there's rebellion that takes place. There's this intelligence. There's treason, is essentially what this is. Okay, so we're going to stop here, and next time we're going to look at this abomination of desolation. Okay? Until then, I hope, once again, I hope this is really laying it out for you, and I'm hoping that this is putting it all into perspective. When you go back and you read the book of Daniel for yourself, hopefully you'll understand how all these pieces work together. I'm kind of giving you more of an outline than going through verse by verse exegesis. So until the next video is uploaded, grace and peace to you. I hope that this is doing well for you. As I said, until then, grace and peace in Christ. God bless you all.